الحمد لله وكفى والصلاة والسلام على من لا نبي بعد وبعد. Inshallah, it is our hope that we will be able to reach from the year 865 to the year 965 Hijri, inshallah. There's a lot of material to go through, and we're now entering into the phase just before the colonizing of the Muslim world. So we're entering into a new phase in which the kuffar, unhappy with having to trade with Muslims and having to deal with Muslims, decide to try to find another continent or new lands to use where they do not have to trade with Muslims, where they don't have to deal with them. And we will find this occurring later in Jim Crow laws that they passed when they took over India, and other things where, because they don't want to deal with you as human beings, they pass specific laws and certain legislations, even though they're in your country, where they don't have to deal with you. We start covering the area from 865 to 895. As of 865 AH, a huge flood inundated the houses in and around the outskirts of Mecca. The flooding continued into the year 867 AH until the water actually came into Al-Masjid al-Haram and rose near to the door of the Kaaba. A major incident came in 872 AH when the city of Homs, it rained stones from the sky around the rainy season. Some people were killed in the process. The stones that it rained down are mentioned as having been hot, white in color, and bead-like. So these stones that it rained down on the people, because normally Homs has a rainy season, but when the rainy season for Homs came, it did not rain the normal heavy rainfall. Rather, it was these very hard bead-like pebbles that killed some people. In 884 AH, the Abbasid head Al-Mustanjid Billah died. Now, I want you to understand something important. The Abbasids, as we looked at in the last lesson, we had went through 3 successive rulers fairly quickly. The Abbasids were winding down, dying out, becoming a thing of the past. And because they were dying out, it's always Allah's way, when a horrible tragedy befalls this ummah, that Allah always offsets it with something spectacular that happens. So one horrible thing befalls this ummah, Allah offsets it with something spectacular that comes about. That's always been Allah's way. A huge lightning bolt struck Al-Masjid al-Nabawi in 886 AH and destroyed some of the wall, treasure, and gold trellising that had been made around it. However, the burial place of the Prophet ﷺ, Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, and Umar al-Faruq were all intact. Now, the point of this is, we'd been told by the Prophet ﷺ to not overly ornament his grave or the graves of other people to where it was ostentatious. And because they stored treasure in that area next to his grave, big gold bars and diamonds and other pieces of treasure, it was only a matter of time before they would be called to task for this. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala left the Rawdah, the actual area where he's buried, the area where Abu Bakr is buried, the area where Omar is buried. He left that whole area alone. But the area around there that had been built up with trellises and really ostentatious, he struck that area as a warning. Now, after this, there was another massive earthquake in Mecca that rocked the city from one end to the other. So Mecca at this time has suffered floods, it suffered earthquakes. Many things were happening during this time where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was preparing the ummah for things. On the 7th of Jumad al-Ula, 886 AH, on Saturday, the 7th of the Ottoman rulers, Muhammad ibn Murad Khan, died. after consolidating all of the area around him and the rule of the Turks, Sultan Muhammad, also known as Sultan Muhammad al-Fatih, the Conqueror, took the city of Constantinople. This is the same one in which Imam Ibn al-Imad, rahimahullah, he says about him that he was born in the year 835 AH. He was given the Sultan, the governance, in the year 856 AH. Many people, although the Ottomans were around before, many people hold the conquest of Constantinople as the real standpoint from where the Ottomans began. Because Ottoman rule at that point was indivisible. Because the Ottomans had all these areas around the Bosphorus, and there was that one section of Constantinople and the towns around it that were holding out, Ottoman rule was always contested. But once Constantinople fell, then the Ottomans no longer had to worry about anything contesting their rule. And the Ottomans became one huge Jama'ah, and they became the rulers over the Ummah in terms of some of the earthly things. Now, it should also be remembered, this is the same time that Andalus fell. This is the same time as the Spanish Inquisition. Hundreds of thousands of Muslims murdered. The same thing as the fall of Granada, or Granada, in which 100,000 Muslims are killed in one day. The chief mushaf used reading in the city of Granada is thrown from the top window to a jubilant crowd that tore it to pieces. This is what happened in this same time. So at the same time that was happening, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brought about something else spectacular by bringing the Ottoman era in full swing. Now, he was given the Sultan in 856 AH, and he ruled for 51 years. His father Murad, it was mentioned that just the mentioning of his name scared his enemies. But when Sultan Muhammad Fatih, when he ruled, when he first took over, he was only an adolescent, and many people doubted what he could do. He wanted Constantinople because the ruler Constantine over Constantinople was quite harsh. And although the city of Constantinople had been devastated by Crusader runs, many of the churches have been devastated by Catholic churches because these people were Orthodox Christians, they were Byzantine Rite. They were still holding out against the Muslims and were still offering armies from the Crusader era and those times after to help with trying to undermine and destabilize the Muslims. So Sultan Muhammad Fatih, what he did is he sent some of his troops to go and to find out the thickness and width of the walls around Constantinople, because he had heard that they were the thickest walls ever built. And he actually paid a trip in person himself, in which he scaled the walls, climbed over the wall, got inside, took soil and sand samples, scaled the wall again, got back on his horse and rode back, just to get an idea in person himself what type of force he was looking at. After that, he decided to have a cannon designed, and it would be the first of its type in which the cannonball would be large enough in which an actual person could fit inside of it. That's how large the cannonball was. And he wanted this to be the most powerful cannon that had ever been seen. He, at the time of the invasion of Constantinople, fired more than 12 of these cannons at the walls and devastated their defenses. But Constantinople still had their harbor on the Bosphorus, which they used a series of chains that were held together on each side that would keep boats from coming into the harbor. So Sultan Muhammad al-Fatih changed the rules of war by cutting down all the forestry above the Bosphorus and running more than 50 ships over wooden planks that had been greased with whale blubber or fish blubber. And they slid down over 300 ships into the harbor, leaving the government of Constantinople wondering, how did these 300 ships get on the other side of the river without the chains being lowered and all the other ships for Constantinople are on fire. And they took over Constantinople. Sultan Muhammad al-Fatih prayed in the Hagia, or the Hagia Sophia, which at that time had been the Byzantines' largest church, but was left in ruins from invasions. He prayed inside of this church, and as the church had been left in ruins, he had it built up as a masjid. It is now a museum piece. But this was the central masjid, and he wanted a masjid built more glorious than that one. And they started building on one in his lifetime. So Sultan Muhammad al-Fatih was the one who took Constantinople, and is made reference to in the hadith in the Sahih of Ibn Hibban, that blessed is the army that shall conquer Constantinople. Blessed is its leader, and blessed is its army. Please keep in mind these individuals are Maturidis in their creed and Hanafis. If Maturidis are deviant and Hanafis are deviant, then the Prophet ﷺ in this hadith has endorsed deviance. We need to explain this to some of our friends who may have a misunderstanding regarding a hadith or fiqh, because these are the people that took Constantinople. They weren't Arabs, just to let everyone know, they weren't Arabs. These were these Turkish people, these Hanafi scholars, Maturidis, and they changed the face of world history by now bringing the Muslims back into the doorstep of Europe. Now, Imam Ibn al-Imad, rahimahullah, he says further about him. He says, now remember, Ibn al-Imad is an Arab. Now look at how devoid of racism his words are about this Imam. He says, in volume 9, page 516 to 517 of his work, Shadarat al-Dhahab, he says, quote, he was from the most noble and mighty of the sultans from the house of Uthman. He was a great king, a righteous man, great of manners and good of skill, the greatest of the kings in jihad, the strongest of them in perspicacity and hard work. He established his army on fortitude and righteousness. He trusted on Allah more than anyone else and depended on him more than anyone else we can think of in that time. He is the one who established the governance in truth of the Bani Uthman. He is the one who established the laws and jurisdiction of Sharia in the land that he took. He has numerous virtues that cannot be mentioned just in this place alone. He has numerous good qualities that can't fully be mentioned in this place by itself. And the virtues of what he has done could not fill the books in days and nights if we were to write. The impact of what he represents cannot be wiped away. And the years and epochs of time will never wipe away the achievements that he has brought about. His campaigns broke the backs of the cross of those wretched crusaders, those idol-worshipping demons. And he is that noble one who opened up the gates of the great city of Constantinople. His ships landed on the other side of the harbor, shocking them who had believed that their plans were above defeat. It is his army, their champions, that we are proud of. His men who were the real men. And they spent 50 days in the most severe and difficult trials, but they struck fear in the hearts of the kuffar and the rebellious sinners who felt weakness. Yes, this man is a sword of Allah that was unsheathed upon the kuffar and the sinful ones. Allah used him to break the backs of the kuffar and their kufr. He is the one that was patient, and he remained that way until Allah brought him goodness. It is also mentioned in historical reports that legions of angels came down on that day that were seen by witnesses, both Kafir and Muslim alike. And this also led to his victory. At the coming of Constantinople's victory, this day, it had been after 50 days. Let me remind you that the victory day was Wednesday, the 20th of Jumad al-Ula in the year 857 AH. He prayed in the largest of the churches of the Christians. He prayed Salatul Jum'ah there. It was called the Hagia Sophia. It had a massive dome that resembled the sky in appearance. And he indeed had many signs and wonders that came on that day. He established Constantinople as a place for knowledge. He had much fear of Allah. He built numerous madrasas for knowledge, fortified the city with 8 gates, each easy to come in through, and sent the laws of jurisdiction and righteousness throughout there. Allah reward him with the justice and goodness of what he did. And Allah include him among the ranks of the righteous, because he had days of hardship and difficulty, but this did not stop him from achieving his objective. May Allah give him the goodness that he had of this dunya and what shall come in the hereafter. Because he, may Allah have mercy upon him, made a place for the ulama to stay. From the houses that were in Constantinople and around those places. Such ulama he made places for, like Mawlana Ali al-Qushaji, and al-Fadl al-Tusi, and the great Alim Qurani, and others of the ulama of Islam, and the scholars like them. Istanbul became a hub of the dunya, and a place of goodness where people could look at. And it was gathered in there the people of righteousness and goodness, and its ulama till today are the greatest of the ulama of Islam. The people of goodness and righteousness and knowledge. The people that the laity come to when they have questions. And the heads of its household are the people of true righteousness. And so this person, the late Imam, is the one who did this holy action for us. And the amount of lives that he saved from the necks of the Muslims cannot be reckoned, especially the ulama that he helped. We will stop here just at this point because we cannot fully enumerate everything. But the kingdom and governance that he established is truly one of wonder indeed. Close quote. So that is the statement of Imam Ibn al-Imad, rahimahullah, the great historian, regarding this Imam. And so you must understand what he represents when he took over Constantinople, rebuilt the city, put it back on firm grounding. So he didn't just, as some people do, or as some civilizations do, or some nations do, they come and devastate a country, rape the women and children until there's no tomorrow, and then expect them to rebuild the damage that they did and to foot the bill for the war. It's not like some nations do. When we damage a country, we actually fix it. So he rebuilt and fortified the walls, put 8 gates around them, refortified the city, and brought the best of the ulama that he had in that area to that city. That is what the Muslims do. Now, once his victory was secure and all the Mediterranean basin, Fertile Crescent, and other associated territories were under the governance, it was decisively demonstrated that the Abbasid era was finished and no more. The scholars came and met with him, and upon his request, continued in governance and recognized the Khilafah Uthmaniyya as the dominant ruling force. The remaining symbolic Abbasid symbols faded into oblivion. So the Abbasid era was pretty much finished. It faded into oblivion. And nothing remains of the Abbasid era nothing remained of the Abbasid era at that time, except for some of their buildings and some of their lineage. So the original troops of the Abbasid, their protecting troops, some of whom are related to the Abbasids through some of their cousins maybe marrying into them, because remember, the Arab men were marrying the Turkish women, they became the chief rulers in the land, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had brought them about for whatever reason. And so because of that judgment, because of what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brought about, Allah's victory went throughout the earth. And the Ottomans, or Uthmaniyya, they became the sole power in that time. They were the world power. The year 887 AH came in with a huge flood during Dhul Qa'dah in the middle of the Hajj season. 1/4 of the population died, and the water again made it to Al-Masjid al-Haram and killed most of those there making tawaf, and also those who were in lessons of fiqh and such. Mount Arafah had to be deserted due to strange weather conditions and wild animals in the year 889 AH. Around the year 890 AH, the Hanafis were faced with a great challenge when their chief judge, Ibn al-Shihna, died in Cairo. The Shafi'is also lost their chief judge in the same year, Shamsuddin Muhammad ibn Muhammad al-Bulqini, but the inhabitants of Egypt had by now a majority of scholars of the Shafi'i school. The Hanafis were in need of calling some Central Asian Hanafis to fill where they were lacking in muftis in this particular area. Because it must be remembered, Hanafis, because they had fallen out of being in the position of governmental bureaucracy, they did not have people in that particular area. That governance was Ayyubid. The Egyptian and a lot of North Africa was Ayyubid, from Salah ad-Din al-Ayyubi, and then Baybars came and took it. So it was Ayyubid in its form, or Mamluk in its form. The Hanafi scholars and the Hanafi fiqh did not come back into force properly to where it was actually in use in a global sense until Sultan Muhammad al-Fatih. Because once Constantinople was taken over and then the city was rebuilt, he recalled the major Hanafi scholars. Big government, huge government. The Ottomans, that is the classic type of government. Massive government, big military, and then pouring a huge amount of money into building madrasas, madaris, seminaries for Hanafi scholars. And that is how the Hanafi fiqh became predominant in that area again, where previously it had been focused in Central Asia. So now there started to be scholars recalled from Central Asia, and you started finding big ulama in the Arab world with names like Ishmawi, Samarqandi, and titles like this, because these scholars were not Arabs, but they were in many ways more well-versed in fiqh than, say, the Hanafis that had been in the Arab world, because they had had to study and to prove themselves more capable because of the trials that they faced. If we go and rewind all the way back to Abu Mansur al-Maturidi, where being Hanafi and having the correct creed put you in danger. So these scholars from his time all the way down to this made a conscious effort and focused hard on the Hanafi fiqh. Ibn Zurayq, the chief judge in Egypt, died in the year 891 AH and had to be replaced with another scholar of similar caliber. Around the year 893 AH, the Mamluk sultans of Egypt, with the death of Ahmed ibn Abdul Nasir al-Nasiri, suffered a great blow. He was the last of the lineage of Baybars. He was the last of the lineage of Baybars and those who'd come from before to defeat the Crusaders and other armies. Now, from the year 896 to 915 AH, a number of lightning quick events happened. Lightning struck on Masjid al-Nabawi in 898 AH and damaged the same things that had been repaired of the lavish trellises and heavy gold overlay. You think people would have learned the lesson. So lightning struck before, they put it back there, rebuilt it. Lightning hits it again. You think, subhanAllah, that's the second time. And as the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ in the Sahih of Bukhari, the believer is never bitten from the same hole twice. So this should be a warning that don't do that again. It's been hit, the same place has been hit with lightning twice now. Don't rebuild it. In the same year, the conquest of Granada or Granada occurred. The Catholic Church, with the help of King Ferdinand II and Isabella, had been working hard to defeat the Muslims who had ruled the area for over 800 years. The previous Visigoths, who had been Unitarian or Arian Christians, but the Catholic Church named its conquest the Reconquista, which means the reconquest or retaking, although Catholicism had never ruled the area before. Now, this is a very important point that needs to be taken into consideration. The main form of Christianity that had been in that area was Arian Christianity. Arian Christians rejected the Trinity, but still believed that Christ was the eternal Son of God, but he was created at a period of time. So they're still mushriks. But the Catholics say that because they deny the Trinity, they're greater mushriks than the Mohammedans. But the Muslims come in And these people who were Christians and Aryans convert to Islam. The Catholics start to make inroads with some of the Visigoths and Ostrogoths. And in response to doing so, call their campaign of conquest and colonization the Reconquista, the reconquest, as if they were coming back to something that had always been theirs. Like how Columbus discovered America, how the European Jews discovered Israel, how the Portuguese travelers discovered the Philippines, how the East India Company discovered India. There just happened to be several 100 million Muslims living there, but they discovered it. And they hide behind this very carefully contrived language to build up an understanding that they had either always been there or they were taking back something that was already theirs, which is bizarre, because Catholicism did not have a foothold until some of the Ostrogoths and Visigoths converted to Catholicism, which was later, it was much later than the date of the Muslims that had come there in 711 AD. Now, the previous situation is just as I've mentioned. Now, Muslims at this point had to undergo numerous decrees after the destruction of universities, hospitals, and other achievements. Much of this was destroyed, including masjids being ransacked. Those Muslims who had not fled Andalus were told to either convert or die. Those who converted were always under suspicion and referred to as Morisco or Mudajir. So the secret Muslim was referred to as the Morisco or the Mudajir. And those people, even though some of them had said, fine, I've been baptized, I believe that Christ's shed blood at Calvary was for me. I believe that he is the eternal word. For God so loved the world, he gave his only son so that they might not perish, but so they might have life. John 3:16, they believed it. But at home, Dhuhr continued as normal. Asr came in and Salah was done. When Jum'ah came, they stayed back from Mass. And the chimneys would burn the wood for Jum'ah because they would use extra water to prepare themselves for ghusl. This created an issue. And it brought about the Spanish Inquisition, which lasted for over 500 years, and most of its victims were Muslims. You may want to make a note of that, because much of what's mentioned, you'll often miss in history because it won't have the name Muslim on it. You'll think, well, where are the Muslims in all of this? You need to look for Morisco, Moor, M-O-O-R, and Mudajir. And when you start seeing numbers like 20,000 here, they culled 50,000 here, they culled 70,000 here. When you start looking at numbers like that, it gives you an idea of how many Muslims were murdered in cold blood. Fact about it is, as this was going on, as the Abbasid symbolic system was collapsing, Andalus was collapsing, the Abbasids were going up. Allah never, ever, ever leaves this ummah with that type of genocidal terror and doesn't also lift it up in another way. Never. There'll always be genocidal maniacs that will try to come after this ummah, but there will always be other people. I mean, wait till we get to Mao Zedong and the disappearance of 40 million Muslims, or Hitler and the disappearance of 12 million Muslims, or Joseph Stalin and the disappearance of 36 million Muslims. Wait till we get to those people. And you see the trials that this ummah goes through, but Allah blesses them. More Catholics and noblemen were brought into the country to settle abandoned houses that the Muslims had left. Important point. The same thing was done in the 1890s to the 1920s in what we're now calling the State of Israel. The same thing was done from abandoned Cheyenne, Apache, and Arapaho houses by American settlers brought in from England. Notice a pattern? There may be different races, but kufr's face is always the same. So the houses that were abandoned, they weren't sold to them. They weren't given to them. Houses abandoned by Muslims fleeing that area under pain of death. They brought in settlers, who they call citizens or new people or homesteaders or pioneers. Immigrants, they call them. Populated these new areas, which did what? Bolstered the Catholic population. A number of decrees were brought into force. Number one, if anyone is doing any bathing or washing on Friday, he will be killed, as he is a crypto-Muslim. Number two, anyone staying back from mass services on Sundays and Wednesdays will be killed. And number three, all signs of Islam are to be obliterated. The most celebrated theme was when the conquistadores, soldiers, made it to the Tower of Alhambra and tossed the Quran out of the window to a jubilant crowd. So the very large mushaf, tossed it from that window down to a jubilant crowd who quickly tore it to pieces. This happened in different areas. You want to understand interfaith, what that means? This is the reality. Now, you should understand as well, if you want to really do in-depth research, I would advise you to contact your local library and to read up on the Spanish Inquisition if you want to do any really in-depth research. And if you find out how many Morisco, Mudajir, Moorish people were killed, well, you'll be surprised at the numbers. Are you aware that there is a holiday in Spain that celebrates the expulsion of the Moors? And they have to choose lots because no one wants to be the Moor. And the people who play the Moors put on blackface, artificially tan their skin, fatten their lips, put on clothing that is remarkably similar to my own, and they parade through the streets. The crescendo of this ceremony is where the heroes, dressed with robes with crosses on them, which looked familiar, almost exactly like the Ku Klux Klan robes that I saw in my youth, who used to burn our houses down. These heroes, these conquistadores, conquerors, the same ones who killed 100,000 Aztecs in one day. The high point of that ceremony is they slaughter all of the Moors, and those that are left are driven from the city. Do your research. You'll find it. It's still there. It's one of the most popular Spanish holidays. You try to actually stress this to a Spanish person. The wrong that exists in this. Similarly, the wrong of Thanksgiving. Celebrating when some local natives in the Plymouth area helped some English settlers who couldn't feed themselves, and once they were well fed and able to care for themselves, the English settlers showed them the musket. Took over, and now you celebrate this day. Look into this. See what would happen to you if you wanted to celebrate a 9/11 day. Loving the towers, with pictures of the planes ramming into the towers and gathering together and passing out free biscuits and tea. A towering day in history. If you celebrated that day. My mom's taking me out of school. Why? Because it's 9/11 day. Got to go pray at the masjid. You see what would happen to you. But look at the flip side of this. This is a national holiday, so we can't, oh, that's because they're religious and they're good. No, it's nothing to do with that. This is a secular holiday. So it even transcends some of the religious precepts that these people hold. And it's carried, that incident from 1492 all the way to now is still held in high regard by the people of the land that it occurred in. And this is the terrifying thing about it. Catholics also began to think about other issues facing them. The entire Eastern Bloc, from Lower Spain all the way to China, had Muslims manning the borders, merchant price stalls, and other economically lucrative positions. The Ottomans were now the dominant world force, so fighting at this point would not be possible. Christopher Columbus, or also known as Cristoforo Colombo, was sent out in 898 AH, which is on the Catholic calendar AD 1492. It's also the date that Spain fell, the day of the slaughter of the Muslims. Important date for Catholic history. 898 AH to search for the Indios people and an alternative route to India and China where they would not have to trade with Muslims. Why would you not want to trade with people who were different to you, whether you agree with their religion or not? What mentally drives someone racially or religiously to say, we as Muslims, we know that Judaism and Christianity are false, and Buddhism and the people that are engaging in all the terms of false idolatry, but that doesn't stop us from trading and buying and selling with them. What type of bigotry does that show? For people who say, we actually don't want to trade with you, and we're going to risk sending people to the other side of the world in which some of us still believe it's flat and he might fall off the other side. We're going to send them out to try to find another location where we're going to find people where we don't have to trade with you because we don't want to trade with you. What type of sick mind is that? So in 898 AH, they're searching for the Indios people, which were a mythical godlike people they believed that were out there, that were the antecedents to the white race. And they would be these glorious, white-looking, blonde-haired, super, almost Nordic-looking people that they're looking for, that no one still has found. Hitler was looking for them. He failed to find them. He had black hair and brown eyes, but he was looking for them. Other people were looking for them. So he looked for the Indios people and an alternative route to India and China where they would not have to trade with Muslims. Columbus arrived in the Caribbean islands after hiring the help of Muslim sailors running from the persecution in Andalus. These were Moriscos, Mudajirs, hiding their religion. Now, obviously, if they're sailors and you're out there with them and you could die and they know the way and you don't, they sort of run the ship. Now, the fact that he actually used them to get out there means what? That they've already been out there. If they've already been out to Indios or the Caribbean island where he landed, that means if they've already been out there and came back, remember, these are the same people from the Brazil tribe who had been from the Brazil tribe and they'd made it to South America. And now Brazil holds the name of that tribe. Remember, it happened almost 1,000 years ago we made it out there. So is it that hard to understand that we made it to the larger Antilles and to the islands in the Caribbean? Not at all. Not at all, because South America is only a stone's throw. So he gets out there with those Moriscos, and they make it to Hispaniola, or Haiti. Now, Columbus arrived there and was disgusted to have found that some of the Arawak and Carib peoples had Muslims among them. So the whole point of what you were trying to escape, I want to go somewhere where there aren't any Muslims, where there are no brown people, where I will not have to look in the face of anyone that looks like them. And you get there and he's disgusted to find that some of the Arawak, some of the Carib, some of the other people, they're Muslim. Not all of them, but some of them, and that's bad enough. They're there. So he returns with news, however, of the gold and riches in what they're calling the New World. Never mind that someone else lived out there. Because you've arrived there, now it's the New World. Like your house, it's a new house. I've arrived, never mind the fact that you're home. I'm there while you're not home. I found a new house. I've discovered your house. We'll worry about you later. Look at this furniture. Wow, and this refrigerator, what is that? Frigidaire? You see, it's this type of marauding mentality. It's the settler mentality that we're seeing in the news. Recognize it? It's there. So he goes back and explains to them the riches that they found in the New World. He was declared acting regent of the Spanish crown and returned in 900 AH, annihilating and enslaving most of the population. It is of note to mention that the Spanish Inquisition was now in full swing, most of those persecuted being Muslims. So now you have the Spanish Inquisition, the collapse of Andalus happening in one area, and the beginning of a campaign into Central America and what would later become the United States by Cristoforo Colombo or Christopher Columbus. So he sets foot on dry land. 1 year later, he comes back with an armada of 300 ships representing the crown, wipes out the people, takes the gold, but then they realize we've killed everyone. We've got no slave labor. Now what are we going to do? That will then bring us into the huge, devastating ramifications of the Atlantic slave trade. But that will come next lesson, inshallah. Now, the Hanafi scholars began to organize in 899 AH at the newly named Ottoman capital of Istanbul, the former Constantinople. Remember the hadith in Sahih Muslim, a prophecy the Prophet ﷺ gave over 700 years before it happened, that Constantinople would be taken by the Muslims. That prophecy was fulfilled. So the prophecy in the Sahih of Imam Muslim, under the book of Signs of the Hour, under the chapter of the taking of Constantinople. It happened. There's another prophecy that mentions that it shall be occupied again. But at the time that it's reconquered, 6 months later the Dajjal will appear out of that time, and after him the Mahdi will appear. That hadith is in Sahih al-Jami'. It would be the first time after the capital of Istanbul was established, it would be the first time in over 500 years that the Hanafis would have investment from the government. They sought to organize districts that were mainly Hanafis, while the Hanbali judges, who were the chief executioners, doctors, and intelligentsia, were left in place. Some of the Ash'ari scholars were persecuted at times by these new-to-power, strident Maturidis, to the point that some of them had to leave the Ottoman domains. When the Ottomans came in, their game plan was very simple. They did not want to engage or get involved with anything that would pose difficulty to what they were bringing. They saw philosophy, or any of the things connected with philosophy, they saw them as things that might harm what they were trying to bring about. And so because of that, they were very harsh against the study of philosophy, because they said that the study of philosophy or speculative theology is a waste of time. What merits does it bring? Because the Ottomans were interested in one thing: building hospitals, madrasas. And their argument used to be to people who engaged in speculative theology is, okay, so how many hospitals have you built? How many schools have you built with your philosophy? That was their argument. Because the Ottomans were men that were about the business of Allah. Let's build a madrasa, let's build a hospital, let's build a place where people can live, let's build an inn, let's build a hostel. We don't care about what could be or what might be. We are totally interested in what we want to do and what will get done. And so they began building these huge masjids. And the masjids were so huge. I mean, still you look at the Sulaimaniyya, 7 concentric domes on this masjid, massive. Building masjids out of granite. Now think about this. You have Ottomans. We already know that these men are geniuses. They're building masjids out of granite. Some of us that know anything about geology know what that means. That means that they're using diamonds to cut the rocks, because that's the only thing you can cut granite with. So that means they're using diamond for industrial work to cut granite to make concentric domes and circles. If you look at how much design went into that, can you imagine what type of machinery they had? And supposedly we're in the medieval times. Remember, we've already got indoor flush toilets. We've already got street lights. We're not using chamber pots. So it's not that hard to understand that we've got diamond tipped or diamond equipment that we're cutting and shaping masjids out of granite with. There's a huge amount of work that is going on. Huge amount of work. And so with the Hanafis coming in after being in the cold with regards to investment, they began to put a lot of money into their books. And so although it wasn't right in a lot of it, because there was some of the persecution of the Ash'aris, a lot of it wasn't right, but it was an attempt to try to put down excessive philosophy and other things that they believed would slow down the victorious role of the Ottomans throughout their domains. It's also of important note that in Central Asia, as we discussed before, Hanafi was synonymous with Maturidi. And so the Ottomans, who are Hanafis, who are what? Central Asian, they're Turks. They could not understand someone saying, like the Damascus, that we're Hanafis, but we're Ash'ari. That did not compute, that did not make sense. And so anything that provided contradiction or might disrupt it, the Hanafis that were Maturidis and Ottomans saw it as their duty to stamp out any contradiction. Anything that might cause any doubt in the mind of a common Muslim, stamp it out. We'll worry about the consequences of it later. So even sometimes things that were valid difference of opinion, they were beaten down because we don't want this right now. Not now. Once we've consolidated, fine, but not now. And so whether we say it's right or wrong, you have to look at some of the wisdom that they were using, some of the principles behind what they understood. So the Hanafis shifted and moved to Istanbul. And their ulama, it was no exaggeration that Ibn Imad said their ulama became the greatest of the ulama in their time and thereafter. Because if you look, and it doesn't matter which of the four madhabs you refer to, most of the foundational books that summarize the fiqh, Hanafi fiqh, Ibn Abidin, Kasani, Haskafi, those are Hanafis from the Ottoman era. Summarize those books. This Imam Abdul Qadir al-Taghlabi, great alim from the Ottoman era. A lot of the Shafi'i books, the commentaries that have been broken down and summarized, Ottoman era. They produced some of the greatest scholars, and in addition to that, they produced some of the greatest scholars and men of ihsan. Who can say that the Naqshbandi Mujaddidiyya, the real Mujaddidiyya that the Ottomans were, look at what they produced. Look at the type of scholars they made. Diyauddin Khalid al-Baghdadi, one of the greatest Naqshbandi ulama that ever lived. Imam Dawood ibn Sulaiman al-Khalidi, one of the greatest ulama that ever lived in his time. Now, the challenge that they faced was this one. The Mujtahid Murajjih people were almost extinct. So you were coming out of the era, because we remember discussing before that you would have one alim who was in charge of 4 countries. You would have one alim that was a qadi over 6 districts. The Mujtahid Murajjih people began to die out. So what you started to have were ulama in which an alim would be in charge of each city now. So you would have an alim, he would be in charge of Chittagong. You'd have one alim, he would be in charge of Delhi. One alim, because the Murajjih people were getting so thin and dying out that you did not have the same caliber of people to replace them. And the Mukharrijun, those people, the Mujtahidun and Mukharrijun, the people that make fatwa for new incidents that happened, were busy dealing with all these new incidents because of the Ottomans coming into power and all the new things that happened with them coming in. that some of the basic masail that the laymen had, they couldn't deal with those. Not because they didn't have the ability, but because of time. You don't come to a mujtahid mukharrij about, akhi, I have a question about wudu. These are people that are dealing with issues that impact the entire ummah. They're known as the marja'. The marja' means the authorities that people turn to. These are the people that meet, that decide global issues for the whole ummah. They're not the people that you come to and say, yes, I had a question about if your wife is disobedient. I have a question about if your husband's disobedient, is allowed to hit her back, or whatever else, or if your wife is disobedient. You don't ask them these questions, because those people are there for the wider issues. It's the local mufti of a city or a province that you say, Mufti so-and-so, such and such has happened. What do I do about this? They're the people that cover it. So that's what happened. The Hanafis had to come in from the cold. Yemen, later decades, would see that these fissures between the Ash'ari and Maturidi scholars were repaired over time by them working together on collaborative efforts. Yemen rejoiced in the year 901 AH when for the first time the seminal commentary of Imam Ibn Hajj al-Asqalani, Fath al-Bari, was brought to them from Mecca. Previously, muftis there had been concentrating on fatwa and resolving difficult disputes. But now the heavy research turned towards hadith, the different gradings, and resolving contradictory reports. So what happened is the people that were focusing on fatwa, they had not seen Fath al-Bari, the commentary. They'd heard of it, but they'd not seen it. So Imam Ibn Hajj al-Asqalani's book is brought to them. You know, he's a major Shafi'i scholar, and they're Shafi'is. They decide that they're going to act on what's within that book. And the emphasis switches from fatwa to looking at hadith. If you go to Yemen today, Tarim, Hadramaut, wherever, you'll see now the big emphasis is on hadith, 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 hadith. Heavy emphasis on hadith, this, hadith, that. Fiqh is there, but there's emphasis on hadith. Now, that's the case. But you go back then, all those hundreds of years, the emphasis was in a different area. So Ibn Hajar's book changed the face of things. The answer to Ibn Hajar's book, Umdatul Qari, changed the debate between Hanafis and Shafi'is, because when some of the Hanafi laymen read that book, some of them felt energized by the proofs that were within it and began to try to debate. So you'd find Imam Ibn Hajar or other Shafi'i ulama in their class. These are qadis, judges. And there would be laymen in the class saying, yes, but our Imam Al-Aini, he says that this statement that you've quoted is not true. Or he says there's another hadith. These are laymen. But they wouldn't denounce them because they know that they feel that himmah because of the knowledge that they have now. So they felt confident. And so they used to circulate these rumors by some sheikhs that, yes, the Shafi'i madhab, it's all based on weak hadith, and they don't have any real knowledge, and Hanafis are the only ones with strong hadith, because there used to be this big rivalry between, there still is in some ways, this rivalry between Shafi'is and Hanafis. Most times it's been quite amicable, but sometimes it's flared up where they've like damaged each other's minbars, or they've destroyed each other's minarets. But that's not been the ulama, that's been mainly some of the laymen that get energized, that become overzealous, that say, you know, no, I'm going to go after these people. And some of the laymen said, I would never marry a Shafi'i, or some of the Shafi'i laymen said, I'd never marry a Hanafi, and bizarre things like this. But these are things that come from the himma or the himaya of laymen. They don't come from scholars. No scholar worth their salt is going to tell you, hey, don't marry this person because of their fiqh. This is ridiculous. Now, further to this, we see that a comet appeared in the sky at the beginning of 906 AH after rising first in the land of Najd in Arabia. A huge earthquake then rocked the city of Aden in 908 AH, and then a massive fire started thereafter. 909 AH brought with it the Imam Abu Bakr al-Idrus al-Shadhili's death. He had been praying for a way to help him stay up at night, or to be able to wake up for a tahajjud prayer. Imam Abu Bakr al-Shadhili believed that victory came when he discovered, quite by accident, coffee beans in the land of Yemen. After grinding them and drinking it, he was able to stay awake at night. News of this spread, and soon coffee was in further parts of Yemen, Al-Hijaz, Sham, Egypt, and the rest of the Muslim world. A huge debate then erupted, with some scholars, particularly Shafi'is, taking the position that it was impermissible. Some of the scholars who held this position include Imam Shahabuddin al-Ithnawi, Imam al-Qutb ibn Sultan al-Hanafi, and Imam Ahmed ibn Abdul Haq al-Simbati. Most held the position of permissibility, although they split into two camps, one believing it to be strongly disliked and another believing it to be permissible without anything disliked attached to it. So when coffee came about, there was a huge dispute because they saw that when people were drinking it, they were getting a reaction from it, like a stimulus. It's a stimulant. And when they saw this, that people were staying awake, and they saw that people started to open what were called speakeasies. So they would gather together in what looked like small cafes in the back of a madrasa or in the back of some place, in the back of a market. And they would sit down and drink coffee and talk about the politics of the day and these other things. And they would drink 3 or 4 cups of that and not eat. And the adhan would go by and they wouldn't heed it. Right? And it got to the point where some of these people began to say that they can't live without coffee. That if they don't have coffee in the morning, they won't be able to survive. Do you now understand then why some of the ulama said, well, this is clearly an intoxicant, this is haram? Do you understand that? And why most of the ulama went to the position that no, it's permitted, although they split into two camps regarding it being permitted. Some of them saying that it's permitted, but it's disliked because you'll develop an addiction towards it, and it takes you away, and it can be an addiction like an addiction to other things that are impermissible. Some of them saying, no, that's not the case at all. But you need to understand the effect that it had. So people would open these speakeasies, and they'd gather together, and they'd drink coffee out of these big mugs. And they'd sit down and talk about politics and other things and play backgammon. And so they'd be playing backgammon and drinking coffee, and the adhan is blasting away, and they're doing all these other things. And so the backgammon, and they're fighting over who won because they can't remember who rolled the dice last because they've had 3-4 cups of coffee and their eyes are bloodshot. And all these other things are happening to them. Because, remember, there was no cafe au lait. There was no espresso. There was no Americano. Coffee back then was uncut. Coffee was uncut. So you took the coffee, you crushed the beans, and you boiled it, you percolated it, and you drank it straight. You'd have it with sugar, but there was no cafe au lait. So you're having coffee straight. If you have any doubt in your mind about why some of these ulama pass the fatwa that they have, I personally defy you to go and buy a container of Folgers. To take out 1 scoop, don't put it in the coffee machine maker, put it into the cup. To pour hot water into that cup to stir it, and to drink it straight as it is. And to see the effect that it has on you from that moment up until an hour or 2 hours after. And I guarantee there will be a noticeable change in your alertness, your reflexes, and everything. And it's for that reason that why you have a minority of ulama, including some Hanafis, that said it's haram. Mainly Shafi'is that said it. But that's why. Most of the ulama went to the position of it being valid, while they split into two halves, whether it's disliked or not. But you need to understand this. And that's why it wasn't until the early 20th century that you started finding coffee cafes in the Muslim world. Because it was seen as something that low-class people did. That they sat in a cafe and drank coffee. You know, it's like you were someone uncouth. You know, your mother didn't raise you right. You came from a bad family. You were walking on the wrong side of the tracks. You fell off. And the reason why they held that position is you found that the people that were involved in the coffee and these speakeasies, they did neglect their salah. They did play a lot of backgammon. They didn't heed the call of the adhan. And they didn't pray regularly enough. You see, the ulama are looking far beyond what you and I normally look at. We just take it for granted. Buy a big container of Folgers. We just take it for granted. But the ulama don't take things for granted. So although this imam had a noble intention, you see all of the things that it produced. You see 910, you see 910 AH come, and there's a massive earthquake in Zabid and also Zayla in Yemen. The severity was so great that some people fled to the desert out of fear. It's reported that the aftershocks were greater than the earthquake itself. A hurricane then hit Zabid in the year 911 AH and left cities around the area deserted. There were large-scale aerial disturbances in 915 AH, with some of the constellations lighting up and moving very quickly, some of them swirling. Some of the astronomers examined these phenomena and concluded that this must be something that occurs through time. It carried on for 10 or more nights and then dissipated. You may care to make a note of the fact that some of these scholars, including Ibn al-Imad, also said that they were citing objects that were moving through the night sky. So you should not understand that unidentified flying objects or aerial disturbances are something that just belong to wacko people in Skokie, Oklahoma or Illinois. It's something that existed, that was seen by the most knowledgeable of people. And that shouldn't be hard for the Muslim to understand, because Allah says in the Quran that He created what you know and ma la ta'lamun, and what you don't know. And the ulama, like Ibn al-Jawzi and others, state that this is proof that there are other creations besides those that Allah mentioned by name. So it shouldn't be that hard for us to understand that if we know that there are 7 universes, that angels are moving in between these, and that there are jinn, and within jinn there are demons and other things. Well, it shouldn't be that hard, whether we calling them grays or greens or whatever, whether they exist or they don't, or whether they're just jinn. We should know that there are other life forms out there. Now, for other people, it presents a problem. The people that the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, SETI, the people that are always on the search, are there grays or not? Right? For us, as Muslims, we accept the fact that there is other life out there, because we found in historical accounts that they've been made reference to. It's not a problem for us. Now, whether or not they resemble E.T., like in the Robert Zemeckis film, or whether or not they resemble humanoid, or whether they're silicone-based or whatever else, is totally irrelevant to us. Because if you look at most of the people they've abducted, I've not heard of a Muslim being abducted yet. It seems to be the people with the Shahada of La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah aren't very interesting. And we also don't get tortured or tested for pregnancy either. It seems that the main people that get snatched happen to either be Americans or Swedish people. I don't know why the reason is for that, but Muslims don't get snatched. We see them, but we don't get taken. Maybe there's a correlation, I don't know. But we certainly accept the fact that there is that out there. There are other creatures out there. There is a whole other life that's out there that we don't see. That's absolutely true. Now, from the years 916 to 936 AH, there were 3 huge earthquakes that rocked Zabid in Yemen and left numerous people homeless in 916 AH. In that same year, there was also a great deal of activity going on in the sky, in which it appeared to be the case that a star dashed quickly across the sky. The people of Sham, from the laity to the elite, reported to seeing strange objects in the sky that remained for 1 hour before disappearing. A young girl was born in Nuwaydra in Yemen, and when someone came to do the adhan in her ear, she said Allahu Akbar 3 times. This was reported locally and verified by witnesses. All right, so these are things that were going on during this time. I want to mention something as well. During John F. Kennedy's presidential reign, it was reported in newspapers, and you may have to do a microfiche search to document and check this yourself, that strange-looking warships entered the American airspace above the White House and were flying within their airspace. They scrambled the best jets that America had. Remember, this is the greatest country on earth, undefeatable. And they clocked these warship appearing objects doing right angle turns at 8,000 miles an hour. And they disappeared out of the airspace. After an hour, they landed their jets, reported back to base what they'd seen, saw nothing further until an hour later. They were back. Now there were 3 of them. They scrambled the jets again, chased them for several hours, did a left angle turn at 8,000 miles an hour. If you did that in any jet that we've got, at anything over several hundred miles an hour, you'd probably break to pieces, never mind 8,000. They describe them as having opaque windows, not having any landing gear, saucer-shaped. Same process happened the second time. The third time they came into the airspace, and they scrambled the jets, and this time decided to fire upon them. But they could not get close enough to actually fire upon them where they could be within shooting distance. And they chased them throughout other nations' fly zones and couldn't catch them. So not only did they fail to catch these unidentified flying objects, but they now violated the territorial integrity of 3 other nations and had to deal with complaints from them. I'm saying this because not everything that may be seen or said by a wacko or some psycho is necessarily wacko or psycho. It's just the case that the wacko or psycho is saying it. There are sometimes things that are true that we come to know about them because a fool has told us. But that doesn't make them any less true. So there are things out there that we don't know about. Aerial disturbance that has occurred that doesn't make any sense to us through any normal scientific means that we can verify. But it's happened. And it's been recorded in newspapers and reputable bulletins and magazines. So it is out there. I am not subscribing to the view of Robert Zemeckis' E.T. or anything like that, or Close Encounters of the Third Kind. But what I am advising is that you are not alone in the creation. There are 7 universes, 7 of them, that the Prophet ﷺ mentioned. He mentioned there are 7 of them. All right, and he'd been to all 7 of them. So all of the blackness that you see in space, that's one universe, that's one. There are 7 more like that. So don't you think for a second that you're just living in a black smudge and you're just floating around like a guppy in a fish tank. You are living in a big place. And you don't have an idea properly of what you're seeing. Where Allah in the Quran subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions that one of the universes, because there are so many angels glorifying Allah and circumambulating it, it's almost caving in the sky above it. It's that serious. Universe is crowded. We're talking about global warming and the planet's getting crowded. The universe is crowded. All 7 of them are crowded. We're thinking about, what are we going to do? We may have to start genetically modifying our fruit and our meat because there's just too many people. There's going to be 9 billion. What do you do with the 49 billion angels on the day of resurrection that are going to be bringing the fire? What are you going to do with them? What are you going to do with the angel that's got 70,000 heads? On each head are 70,000 mouths, and each mouth is 70,000 tongues, glorifying Allah in languages that we know what we don't know. What are we going to do about him? Alhamdulillah, angels don't eat food, otherwise he'd be perpetually hungry. But what are we going to do about them? We have this self-centered idea that, well, because it pertains to us and its people, that, what are we going to... And we often don't look at the wider issue. And the Prophet ﷺ stressed to us numerous times that this creation is massive. And it's overcrowded. It's swelling with life. In the year 918 AH, this saw the death of the 8th Ottoman Khalifa, his name being Sultan Khan ibn Muhammad Khan. He had been given Khilaf in 887 AH after the death of the previous Khalifa. Sultan Khan was fondly remembered for having opened numerous schools, hospital, places of retreat, laboratories, and other places of higher learning. It would be during his time that vaccinations were introduced on a wider scale to where they were available to the general public. I want you to remember this. This is the early 1500s when Vaccinations were introduced into the Muslim world. Do your homework on when vaccinations were introduced in this country that we're staying in. And now people brag and boast and talk about how come we're this behind and that behind. We've done our work. We just peaked. You haven't even peaked and you're already dying. Vaccinations in the 1500s of the Kafir calendar. 1500s. Much of what had been learned, knowledge, was transferred from the Hanbali doctors from Baghdad to Istanbul. Remember the devastation of Baghdad? They transfer the knowledge to Damascus. Istanbul gets built up as the new main city of Islam. They transfer the knowledge there. That knowledge wasn't forgotten. It was held in the books for safekeeping and in the breasts of men. And then it was transferred. By the year 922 AH, Ottoman power had overrun all other sultans, walis, and small governorates in order to bring them in line. A firm foothold was established, and it is often from here that historians call it the Ottoman era. In 924 AH, a disillusioned priest and theologian by the name of Martin Luther, an Augustinian monk in the Catholic Church, hung his 95 theses on the door of numerous churches and public buildings. Many of his pilgrimages and visits to Catholic holy sites had shown him that the Catholic Church might be the forerunner to the Antichrist mentioned in the book of Revelation in the Christian Bible. So, here you have Martin Luther, a German monk, Christian theologian. This is the reason why there are Protestants today. Up until this time, there was one Catholic Church with 7 madhabs. Martin Luther, an Augustinian monk, preacher, theologian. He had not been able to make pilgrimage to some of the holy Catholic sites. He manages to make it to Rome, and he makes it to a number of other locations. He was devastated by what he saw, because he saw the Pope and the area around the Holy See so resplendent with jewels and gold and agates and rubies. And he saw people on the steps with rags hanging off them, serving as clothes, begging with a pot. And he began to ask questions. He began to translate the Bible from its Latin into the German. He began to study the original languages in depth, far more depth than he had studied them before. And he started to come to conclusions. The conclusions changed the face of what people today are calling Christianity. His 95 theses were the beginning of it. What really set Luther into motion was the concept of paying for indulgences for purgatory. It is believed by some Catholics, particularly at that time, that if someone was particularly sinful and they died and they were sentenced to purgatory, they were not righteous enough for heaven. They were not wicked enough for the fire. So they have to be purified in purgatory. There were people who used to offer indulgences in which you would pay them, and they would say a specific prayer or offer to release that loved one from purgatory. Now, Martin Luther saw this as an Augustinian monk, and he was enraged. So he noted down a list of his 95 points of difference with the Catholic Church and those issues, and he nailed them on the door of public buildings and churches. It caused a huge uproar. A huge uproar. It ultimately led to a meeting, the Diet at Worms, with Martin Luther meeting with the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V, where he stated his religious beliefs. And he was excluded after that meeting. Part of his knowledge of what he wanted to do came from his seeing Muslims who were Turkish around him, because he'd been to some other countries in his life. It's particularly noted in the 3-volume text called What Luther Says, that he had seen he'd seen Muslims, he'd been around them. And he said that he was surprised that the Mohammedans had copies of their religious writings that they could all read from. And that the Mohammedans actually took part in their worship. So their prayer leader and the congregant were both part of the worship. That's not how it was for the Catholic Church at that time. You would have partitions up where the priests would be doing the Eucharist. And when they did the oblation of the host, in which they said the words of bringing the host to life, where the bread became the actual body of Christ and the wine became the actual blood of Christ, the congregation were only spectators. They were not taking part in the Mass. And that shook Luther. How come these people who are Mohammedans, Saracens, beasts of the earth, they've got copies of their religious books and they can all read them? Their worship seems so clear and to the point. These people who don't even believe in Christ, he stated, seem to have more access to their religious documentation than we do. And so Luther translated the Bible into German. But in the course of doing so, met huge opposition from the Catholic Church. He came with the doctrine of the 5 solas. One of the solas is sola fide, that salvation is by faith alone, by Christ alone, by grace, through grace. That was one of the solas. The other sola was sola scriptura, which means that we only take what's from the Bible. We don't take anything else that's from there. This put him out of the orbit of Catholic theology because he rejected the tradition of the Catholic Church. He then came with the position that made him infamous, where he said that the Catholic Church and the Pope is the forerunner to the Antichrist, mentioned in the book of Revelation. He is the beast, mentioned in the book of Revelation. The 666 is him, the Pope. And he began cross-referencing these examples of the Pope to different historical epics that had happened in history, which is pretty convincing. I don't argue with that point. Maybe he is a forerunner to the Dajjal. Maybe, because a lot of the points that he connected made sense. And so Luther came into direct confrontation. And from there, he was called Protestante, or heretic, or Protestant. We're calling Protestant. Protestante was normally a word used for heretics. But Protestant is now, if you ask someone today, in this country, are you a Catholic or a Protestant? I'm a Protestant. Okay, you've admitted you're a heretic. It's like if you ask a Muslim, are you a Sunni or a Mubtadi'? I'm Mubtadi'. No Sunni in his right mind would say that. But Protestants say, yes, I'm a Protestant. And it changed everything. Now, in the course of bringing about Protestantism, Martin Luther, he started rechecking all the books of the Bible. And he concluded that some of the 81 books or 73 books, whatever was in the Douay canon, were not from God. He said the book of James was not scriptural, and hence was not revelation. In the early part of his career, he disputed the book of Revelation until he found the part about the beast and the Antichrist. And then obviously that must be scriptural. He also used to abstain from pork and other foods and advised other Christians to do so, and to try to avoid wine as well. You get the feeling this man was around Muslims for a period of time. His translation of the Bible into the vernacular of German and not the Catholic Latin spread like a fire. You have unique traits among the Protestants that include the following: usury or interest being permitted. He was the first one of the Christian church to declare riba halal. When Henry VIII broke with the Catholic Church because of the issue of his marriage, he went straight into the Protestant Reformation. People used to die in the streets here before they would deal with riba. Henry VIII and Cromwell made it possible for riba to be halal here. Prior to that time, it wasn't. The Catholic Church would not allow people to trade in riba. The only people that were allowed to trade in riba was Jews, because they said they're cursed, and we don't do any trading with them, and they sealed them up in ghettos. The Catholic Church did not trade in riba. So when the Protestant Church began to trade in riba, The Catholics said this is one of the clear proofs that these people aren't Christian. They reject Christ because they quoted several passages from the New Testament, not the Old, from the New Testament that they believe were proofs that the Prophet Isa, according to their books, said that one must not trade in riba. These are their books. Number two, concubinage and the issue from it is legitimate. All right? Concubinage. The Catholic Church did not allow people to just take on mistresses or concubines, and the issue from that to be legitimate. This is part of what happened with Henry VIII. All right? The Protestants allowed it. Number three, every Christian is duty-bound to read the Bible for him or herself with the guidance of the Holy Spirit and come to conclusions on all faith matters. All right? These three issues are what created a huge fissure. At this time, you had Martin Luther, Knox, Calvin, Zwingli, and the other Reformation fathers, which will probably come up next lesson, inshallah. But these were the people that are responsible for why today there is an Anglican church, there is a Baptist church, there is a Peace Lutheran, Pentecostal, Oneness Pentecostal, Universal Pentecostal, Foursquare, right? Church of God in Christ, Episcopalian, right? All Saints Church, all these different churches. Most of that is coming from the Protestant Reformation. Jehovah's Witnesses came out of the Protestant Reformation. Mormons came out of the Protestant Reformation. Although they would say, no, we didn't. We have brought about Christ's successful invigoration of his doctrine. Yes, but your books are based upon the King James Bible, and that's Reformation. So they came out of the Reformation. They dropped certain books from the Christian canon. So you'll notice the Protestant Bible has 66 books. But the Douay canon of the Bible has 81. Some Catholic ones have 73. The Ethiopian Orthodox, 81. Coptic Christian, 100. You do the math. We've got 114. I don't know about them, but we've got 114 surahs. 933 AH came with Charles I of Aragon decreeing that all Muslims must convert or die within his jurisdiction. Those who had been forcibly converted before some 5 years ago could be exempt from this decree. So if you'd been forcibly baptized by pain of death and you became a Christian 5 years before that, you're fine. Don't worry. This threat is not for you. It's for the other ones who haven't come forward that we've threatened. It's for them. Charles I of Aragon. As the drug trade rose due to Frankish expansion into areas around the Middle East and Western Europe, Muslims in 966 AH had to face the menace of hashish. It had been in the Muslim world, but it was now given commercial respect by some traders who used to sell it at the same speakeasies that they had for coffee. And this is very important now, because now speakeasies are going just from coffee and backgammon to hashish now. So they're smoking hashish, they're drinking coffee, they're playing backgammon, they're neglecting the salah, they're not listening to the adhan, right? And these speakeasies, you may want to note this down, these speakeasies would crop up in the United States during the Prohibition era. You remember when alcohol was outlawed by the United States government during the Prohibition era? This is when Al Capone became a big kingpin because he began to trade heavily in alcohol and other drugs. And these speakeasies started to crop up during that time because they learned it from the people that were involved in speakeasies from years before, books that they'd read before, documentation they'd seen before. So the speakeasy is a phenomenon. Now, we have deaths during this time. Deaths during this time. We have Shihabuddin Ahmed ibn Muhammad al-Bulqini, Abu Alawi Abdullah ibn Abi Bakr ibn Abdul Rahman al-Yamani, who was the chief scholar of Hadramaut. Both these ulama died in 865 AH. This particular alim, Aba Alawi Abdullah, he's one of the patron saints of what we're calling the Ba'alawi tariqah. Some people may have heard of the Ba'alawi tariqah. Some people follow this tariqah. Right? He's one of the patron saints of the Ba'alawi tariqah. Right? Most of the Yemenis are upon this tariqah. As Sayyid al-Hasan ibn Muhammad ibn Ayyub al-Hasan al-Shafi'i, Khalaf ibn Muhammad ibn Sulaiman al-Ayyubi, who was the last of the Ayyubid rulers from Salah ad-Din and his brothers. Shamsuddin Abu al-Fath Muhammad ibn Ahmed ibn Abi Bakr al-Qahiri al-Shafi'i, all of these who died in 866 AH. Others who died in 867 AH include Burhanuddin Ishaq al-Baghdadi, the great-grandson of Sheikh Abdul Qadir al-Jilani. Abu Bakr ibn Muhammad al-Qalqashandi, who was a great Shafi'i from Jerusalem. Abu Sa'adat Sa'ad ibn Muhammad ibn Abdullah al-Hanafi, one of the great Cairo muftis. Zainuddin Abu Abdullah al-Qadiri, Ibn al-Razaz al-Matbuli, who was a Hanbali judge. Others who died in 868 AH are Alamuddin Salih ibn Sirajuddin al-Bulqini, the great Shafi'i judge. Jamaluddin Abdullah ibn Abi Bakr al-Humsi, who was the Hanbali judge in Homs. Abu al-Hasan Ali ibn Sudun al-Bashbaghawi al-Qahiri, the Egyptian Hanafi judge. As-Sayyid Yahya ibn Bahauddin al-Sharwani, Hanafi judge in Egypt in 868. Then we have ulama who died in 869 AH. These are Shihabuddin Ahmed ibn Muhammad al-Abbasi, Hanbali judge in Hama. And we have the Sultan Abdul Haq ibn Abi Sa'id al-Marini, who was the chief head over Fez in Morocco. You then have in 870 AH Burhanuddin Ibrahim ibn Ahmed al-Maqdisi, a Shafi'i judge. Ibn Abi Sa'ud al-Shafi'i. Shihabuddin Ahmed ibn Muhammad al-Hanbali. Nizamuddin Umar ibn Ibrahim al-Ramini, chief judge residing in As-Salihiyya in 870 AH. Wajihuddin As'ad ibn Ali al-Tanuhi. Shihabuddin Ahmed al-Bayt al-Lubadi. Abu al-Hasan al-Khajandi, who was the Hanafi judge. Sharafuddin Yahya al-Munawi, who was the Egyptian and Shafi'i judge and grandfather of the great Abdul Ra'uf al-Munawi. Abdul Ra'uf al-Munawi is the commentator on a book called Al-Jami' al-Saghir. Al-Jami' al-Saghir is a book of 8,000 ahadith or more written by Imam Jalaluddin al-Suyuti. Imam Abdul Ra'uf al-Munawi, rahimahullah, wrote a commentary on this book in alphabetical order of the ahadith. Others have tried to comment upon the hadith, but I think Munawi's commentary is the most exhaustive. An individual by the name of Muhammad Nasiruddin al-Albani attempted to collate this book, put his own name on it, and distorted the text and raped the original meaning of these ahadith. So unfortunately, that spread like a wildfire throughout the Middle East. But I would say to people, if they look at any printing, that they should take the printing of al-Munawi. Other ulama who died in 873 AH were Taqiyuddin Abu al-Abbas al-Qusantini, who was an Egyptian Hanafi scholar. Abdul Awwal ibn Muhammad al-Murshidi, who was a Hanafi judge. Nuruddin Ali ibn Narbak al-Hanafi. Muhibbuddin al-Qurshi. Shamsuddin Muhammad ibn Abdul Rahman al-Maqdisi al-Ulaymi. And then we have other ulama from 875 AH. Ash-Shihab al-Hijazi, who was a Hanafi judge in Cairo, but originally he was based in Mecca. We have another alim who was Izzuddin Abu al-Barakat al-Masri. Abdullah al-Nashwan, who she was a Hanbali judge in 876 AH in Egypt. All right, this is a female. Remember, females, you're still finding female names among the list of judges, muftis, scholars, teachers, doctors. These names are still cropping up. They're still cropping up. It wouldn't be until the early 1790s, perhaps, of the Kafir calendar that you start finding the names start to thin out because of invasions and different things like this that were happening to the Muslims. You have Shihabuddin al-Ramli, the Shafi'i judge. Badruddin Hassan ibn Ahmed ibn Abdul Hadi in 877 AH. Mawla Hassan al-Halabi, one of the Hanafi scholars. Khairuddin Khalil al-Hanafi. Zainuddin Qasim ibn Qutlubagha, Hanafi judge in Egypt. Qutlubagha, who died in 879 AH, he's one of the greatest Hanafi hadith scholars that ever lived. Qutlubagha. He wrote numerous commentaries on different collections. And his name will come up often, not just in fiqh, but in hadith. Qutlubagha is amazing. Qutlubagha he is remarkable. He was quoted, and his biography was given a brief biography by Sheikh Rabat al-Haq in his book on Salah. Qutlubagha's name appeared in the back, as it rightly should have. And he made mention of this big Egyptian saint, because really he's a name that you shouldn't do without. He's someone that should easily be on your tongue because of his knowledge of hadith, 200,000 on the tongue, and his knowledge of fiqh. He was remarkable. He was absolutely remarkable. Another one we had is Ibn Amir Hajj al-Halabi, who was a Hanafi judge who died in 865AH. You then had Burhanuddin Ibn Muflih in 864AH. Okay, Burhanuddin Ibn Muflih is one of the commentators on the text Al-Muqni'. There were 400 commentators on his text, on the text Al-Muqni', 400 commentators on Al-Mukhtasar, Al-Muqni' has had about 9 commentators. He was one of the 9 commentators with his text Al-Mubdi' Sharh Al-Muqni'. And Burhanuddin Ibn Muflih, rahimahullah, what he did is he summarized the positions from all the other commentaries on Al-Muqni' and collected them together in one. It's about 4 volumes. I think although it's missing some of the depth of the other commentaries, I don't think Al-Mubdi' was meant to be as in depth as the other commentaries, say Al-Furu' by Imam Ibn Muflih. Al-Furu' is 11 volumes in some printings, whereas Al-Mubdi' is 4 in most printings. I don't think it was meant to be exhaustive. I think it was meant to be a summary. And Burhanuddin is the grandson of Imam Ibn Muflih, whose book Al-Adab al-Shar'iyya we did. So Burhanuddin Ibn Muflih is his grandson. So we're still benefiting from the knowledge all the way down. We're benefiting from the knowledge of the Ibn Muflih family. Palestinians, again, Palestinians, saving the day. Most of the Hanafi scholars that I've mentioned here that are coming from Palestine, like Halab, Palestinian scholars. A lot of them. We then have Alauddin al-Mardawi, Ibn Fahd al-Makki, Mawla Khasraw al-Hanafi, who's a Hanafi judge in Constantinople. All those ulama died in 885 AH. Now, this Imam, Alauddin al-Mardawi, he was the last Mujtahid Murajjih to die. You may want to note that. He was the last Mujtahid Murajjih to die. The last one. Now that's interesting, because Imam Ahmed was the last Mujtahid Mutlaq to die. The last Mujtahid Mutlaq to die. This Imam, Alauddin al-Mardawi, was the last Mujtahid Murajjih to die. And you see the writings that he left behind, where those Murajjih people, they started writing indexes. And so when they would write an index, they'd say, if you see the Hanafi scholars using this phrase, they mean by that this. Because they realize the people coming after them might not have the depth to know who's being referred to. Like sometimes if you're reading a book in Hanafi fiqh and somebody says, and Al-Qadi has said that this is the dominant position. Who is Al-Qadi? That could be anyone. Shaykh al-Islam has said that this position is weak. Who is Shaykh al-Islam? Imam al-Ansari has said this position is... Right? If someone says Al-Qadi, for the Hanbalis, it's Al-Qadi Abu Ya'la. If they say Shaykh al-Islam, for the Shafi'is, it's going to be someone different. But there's titles and phrases and nicknames that are used, or you'll be reading through a text and it'll just have Sheen, Noon, Ra. There'll be the discussion of the fatwa and the issue, and they'll say, yes, and this issue is this. Ha, Mim, Noon. What's this? Hamim it was related in Ahmad's Musnad. And Noon is Nisa'i. Or you'll see after it, Mim, Ta. Muttafaqun alayh, Bukhari and Muslim. How are you going to learn these things? You either have to learn through an index, or, right? Now, some of our teachers today don't like indexes. A lot of our teachers don't like indexes. They said you should learn because of tabahur, because of heavy reading and study. So it was beat into us, and we used to get in trouble for going to the index. The books that catch you going to a book of mufradat, what are you doing? They make you do extra 500 hifz because they see you going for the mufradat. I'm just going to look something up. Get away from there. What do you think you're doing? I'm just going to look at the mufradat of this hadith, because you're trying to find the beginning of the hadith. You're trying to find the hadith. And you're thinking, well, rather than go through all 6 volumes of Bukhari's Sahih, I can just find it in the mufradat, and then I'll know where it is. And so you go for the mufradat. What are you doing? Sit down, ya tilmeed. Sit down, student. They catch you going through the mufradat again, huh? Give me 500. And you got to do 500 of whatever the book is that day. So the indexes, the fahris is fine. But the fahris is generally used by the qadis or those above who are going to be explaining it to the layman. In the beginning stages, the student of knowledge and those people, they don't go to the fahris. You know why? Because it makes you weak in your later career. Because you're always used to the fahris. You know how many times I've seen someone who is supposed to be a student of knowledge get taken apart because he can't remember where something is found, even the general proof of it, like in just a foundational issue. It's like one sheikh, he told us, he said, we're all fuqaha until the lights go out. And what he meant by that is, when you got the lights on, you can reach your library, you've got your alim CD, you've got everything. Oh, you're Shaykh al-Islam. Ya alim al-ulama. Ghawth al-a'zam. Right? Mufti al-anam, the mufti of the mortals. But then all of a sudden your meter cuts out. Hits the emergency marking. And all of a sudden someone calls you on your mobile with a mas'ala. I can't get my books. I can't read my books. The cataracts on your eyes don't allow you to see. I can't get my books. What good is such knowledge then? That's why it was beaten into us repeatedly. Hifz, tabahur, tabahur, tabahur. Hifz, hifz, hifz. Because it's important to understand. So when these mujtahid murajjih people were dying out, they wrote down so people would understand coming after them what mim ta and what hamim and what noon and what these other things meant, or what anhu. Anhu literally in Arabic just means from him. Anhu. What does that mean? Nassa alayh. It's a text mentioned from him. Who? Right? Only someone who done tabahur would mean who it's talking about. Right? And sometimes you have ulama who they have similar names. And then you really start to get in trouble. Or what if you have a fatwa or fatwa from the Imam? Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah is given a fatwa on a matter, but here it seems like there's a similar one. Or it seems like the Qadi Abu Yusuf and Muhammad bin Hassan al-Shaybani are going against him. How do you reconcile it? Can it be reconciled? That's where all these issues come about in. So the mujtahid murajjih people left behind these things. Right? We also have Kareem ud-Din Abu al-Mukarim al-Buwaiti, who died in 888 AH. Khawaja Zada died in 893 AH. Burhanuddin Ibrahim al-Laqani died in 896 AH. Badruddin al-Hussein ibn al-Siddiq al-Ahdal, the Yemeni judge and grammarian, died in 903 AH. He wrote perhaps one of the greatest commentaries on the Arabic text Al-Ajrumiyyah. He's a wonderful, Imam al-Ahdal is a wonderful alim. Wonderful alim. Another alim who died, Ibn al-Mabrid, died in 909 AH. Now this is very important. Imam Ibn al-Mabrid, along with Imam Shihabuddin Ahmed al-Uskari and a number of others, were the teachers of a man by the name of Ahmed ibn Atwa. Okay. Ibn al-Mabrid was a teacher of a man, he was a chief judge in Damascus, And he was the teacher, along with a couple of others, of a man by the name of Ibn Atwa. His lineage extends to Ibn Atwa. So the teaching lineage goes through Ibn Atwa. Uskari, its lineage goes through Ibn Mabrid to Uskari, and then the lineage goes through another alim, who is Musa al-Hajjawi, another Palestinian. Musa al-Hajjawi, who died on Eid al-Adha, before the Eid Salah. Imam Musa al-Hajjawi died 958 Hijri, according to some accounts. He is the direct teacher of Ahmed ibn Atwa. Ahmed ibn Atwa was the first Qadi ever to be given permission to be Qadi over the entire peninsula. That had never happened before. Okay? So he's been sitting with Imam Musa al-Hajjawi, rahimahullah, the writer of Zad al-Mustaqni', one of the most important commentaries in Hanbali fiqh. So he sat with him for a number of years, memorized 10 books from him. He turns to him and he says, with Imam al-Uskari, now go back to your people. Because Imam ibn Atwa was coming from where? Imam Ahmed ibn Atwa was coming from Najd. He's coming from Najd, the Najd region. He said, now go back and teach your people. He said, I shall certainly go back and teach the people of Najd. He said, no. We give you permission over the whole of your domain. All of Arabiya. 3 Qadis told him, go back, you're in charge of all of Arabiya. They held that as a district. This is the first time that ever happened. Ever. So he goes back and he teaches his people. Now another name will come up next week. This name is, and I want you to maybe write it down because we'll come to him. His name is Sulaiman ibn Ali al-Musharraf. Sulaiman ibn Ali al-Musharraf. He's going to come up. And he's very important because he is a key to part of the puzzle that we'll start to unravel over the next couple of lessons. If you can put the pieces together from Sheikh Sulaiman ibn Ali al-Musharraf, put the pieces together from him to the others, you will have reached critical mass. Now you have Muhyiddin Abdul Qadir al-Rajihi and Muhammad ibn Ahmed, who was head of the Zaydiyya Shia in Yemen. Both of these people died in 910 AH. Now, the Zaydiyya are the most moderate of all the Shia. They do not curse Abu Bakr, Umar, and Uthman, but they tend to call themselves Tafdiliyya, the preferers. They said it would have been better if Ali had been made the Khalifa. And we still accept the rule of Abu Bakr and Umar and Uthman. But it would have been better if Ali been the Khalifa. To which the scholars of Ahlul Sunnah responded to say it would have been better if you hadn't have said that because you're still kuffar. Do you see how resolute our people were and still are, most of them? There's not a lot of wishy-washy. Now there's people, the windshield wipers are going one way and they're going another, and they're not firm on what they're upon. They're not firm, and that's why they're in the problems that they're in. So the Zaydiyya claim lineage from Zayd ibn Ali. Zayd ibn Ali was going out to battle against one of the tyrannical rulers in his time. And they said to him, what do you say about Abu Bakr and Umar? Because he's trying to gather support to fight against one of these tyrannical rulers. And some of the Shia are around him. And he says, I don't say a bad word about the two sheikhs of Islam. Because Abu Bakr was the first one to be called Shaykh al-Islam. And Ali called him Shaykh al-Islam. When they heard him say, I do not say a bad word about the two sheikhs of Islam, they abandoned him. They abandoned him. And they said, Tarafaduni. He said, Tarafaduni. He said, you have abandoned me. And that's why the Shia are called Rafidah, the abandoners. Because they turn their back on their own leaders who tell the truth. Muhammad Jawad Shirri, an Iraqi Shia, who said, maybe Abu Bakr, Umar, and Uthman weren't kuffar. Maybe we've taken a strict turn, we shouldn't have taken that position. They kicked him out. Turned back on their own leaders, kicked him out. Because he started to look through the books and realized that the Shia, their full theology is not summarized in a book until years after the first three generations, which means prior to then their beliefs had no origin. Which meant what? Which meant no one had that theology. And as he started researching, he found that. And in his intelligence and in his wisdom and in his honesty, he said, well, I have to reject this. You also have Sultan Muhammad ibn Muhammad, the famous mujahid and inventor. He was also the ruler of Gujarat, India. He died in 916 AH. A lot of the Gujaratis during this time, Gujarat was its own government, had its own sultanate state that was given to it by the Ottomans. If you were in India at that time and you were about anything, you moved with the Gujaratis because they were the ones getting things done. And in some ways, it's still like that with regards to masjid building and everything. We can see it in Leicester. We can see it in other places where the Gujaratis have been. We can't deny it. Do the Gujaratis or do they not get things done? When Gujaratis show up in a place as a group, if they don't have a masjid, they get one built within a year. We can't deny that. We have to accept that fact. Are their masjids well built or not? They're well built. Are they still on, 20, 30 different mortgages and remortgaging and MasterCarding and turning out all their MasterCard accounts? No. Either bought on cash or built up for a plot of land they've bought. They've always had it in them. From this time that I'm mentioning here, they've always had it in them to be business-minded and to use their skill. So whenever you've seen Gujaratis come into an area that they've built a masjid, if you look at the state of Gujarat, look at the quality of those masjids built there, and look at the masjids built in Pakistan today. Masjids built here today. Look at them. Look at the pictures of them. Look at the masjids the Gujaratis build here and in the United States. And other countrymen from the same subcontinent. Compare the quality. You do your own research. I'm not telling you anything. But I think you'll notice an appreciable difference. Further to this, Ahmed ibn Atwa, who I've already mentioned, he died in 948 AH. And then we have Taqiyuddin al-Futuhi, who died in 949 AH. Now, he was the last Qadi over several districts. When he died, Egypt came to a standstill because they didn't know what to do, because people were used to having Qadis over 4 or 5 countries. One Qadi. So he died. He was Qadi over all of Egypt, Eastern Africa, so he just dies suddenly. And they thought, subhanAllah, what will we do now? They were shocked. So they had to appoint all these other Qadis under him. They had to appoint all these other Qadis under him. So we see a lot of material has been covered, alhamdulillah, in this short period of time. أقول قولي هذا استغفر الله لي ولكم استغفر الله إن الله غفور رحيم يرحم الراحمين. Now I realize I've gone through a lot of material in a short period of time. Is there any question on what I've covered? Yes.
A couple of questions there. First one was, you mentioned Hazrat Ali radiallahu ta'ala calling Abu Bakr radiallahu ta'ala Shaykh al-Islam. What's the reference for that?
Question is regarding Ali radiallahu anhu calling Abu Bakr as-Siddiq Shaykh al-Islam. This is mentioned in the Tarikh al-Khulafa by Imam al-Suyuti. I'm not sure which volume. I'd be more likely to say the first volume, but I don't know for sure. But I do know it's also been mentioned by Imam Ibn al-Jawzi in his book Al-Muntazam. I know for sure it's in the first volume in there. not the first volume, but the volume under the Tarikh al-Khulafa and al-Muntadhir by Imam Ibn Jawzi. Yes.
And second question, you mentioned that the Prophet ﷺ mentions the 7 universes. What's
Yes.
the reference for that one?
Okay. The 7 universes is under the hadith in Sahih Muslim, under the Al-Isra wal-Mi'raj, when he mentioned going through what's translated in English as 7 heavens. But all the ulama and commentary understand that each one of those is a universe. That's why when they comment upon verses like, say, in Surah Al-Mulk, the 67th surah, and others, they understand each sama to be a universe. And so when he was going into each one of those, they understood that to be a universe, each one of them.
And also, sort of by link really, there's 2 questions. One, you mentioned regarding the asking the fatwa, the sheikhs, of simple questions like disobedience of the wife or the husband. What's your take on the ayah, the wadribuhunna, and also in relation, translating that in relation to the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, where on one occasion he said, "Go ahead, do it," and then on another occasion when I think it was Hazrat Umar radiallahu anhu went back and somebody had complained to him that some of the Sahaba were actually taking that into practice, and that the women folk weren't liking it. So what's your take on that?
Question is regarding the surah in the Quran in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned وَضْرِبُهُنَّ and strike them, and what the significance of that is based upon some statements in which it's purported that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam told someone to strike, gave permission for some people to strike the female companions, and Omar reporting back regarding this, in which some of the women folk complained. Here's what I can say about it. Alhamdulillah. That ayah, from what little research I've done on it, is in Imam Muwafiquddin's commentary in Al-Mughni. When he discusses this ayah, he places that discussion and other parts of it under the passage of the hudud. And the hudud are the judicial laws, which are carried out by the qadi or the judge. What that would seem to me to intimate is that it would be the qadi that would carry that out. Looking at that, you have another hadith in Sahih al-Jami' in which the Prophet ﷺ said, "Do not strike the female bondmaidens of Allah." Just don't strike them. What that would tend to say to me is that that ayah then, referring to striking them, had to do with a judicial punishment. The same thing the rest of the judicial punishments are connected to for public drunkenness and other ones. That's what little I've been able to gather when I looked at that issue, because I went straight to Imam Muwafiquddin in his documentation. And from what he put across, the fact that he put it under jinayat and hudud, under judicial punishments, it would make me understand that this would be administered by the judge. Just like, for example, flogging for drunkenness. It's not like brothers in Coventry, flogging Muslim brothers they found that were drinking, and saying, we have to implement the hudud. It's not for them to do that. And with that hadith regarding not striking the bondmaidens of Allah in Sahih al-Jami', that's what little I know about the topic.
Jazakallah, that's probably one of the best answers I've received.
That's the most I can tell you.
And last one, you mentioned Yemen, and my wife likes Nuhamin Kala, but some people say he's a Deobandi alim, so I don't know what your position is, because he's apparently read some mashkuk, or made reference to mashkuk
statements about them. Yeah. The question is about Imam Nuhamin Keller and some of the statements that he wrote about the Deoband and other things. Alhamdulillah. Here's what I can say about this. In order to properly understand the issue between the Deoband and Jama'ah Ahl Sunnah, you must read the source literature on the topic. But the source literature doesn't make any sense unless you first understand the relation between Ahlul Sunnah and Salafiyah. Because the Brelwi-Deoband divide is an offshoot of the Salafiyah Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah issue. The issue of Deoband and Jama'ah Ahlul Sunnah doesn't make any sense if you haven't looked into the issue of Salafiyah. I think the case with Imam Nuh Amin Keller is he's read some of the documentation of some of the Deoband scholars, but he has not read some of the seminal texts from Jama'ah Ahlul Sunnah which actually explain their position. For example, books Ad-Dawlat al-Makkiyah, Husam al-Haramain. These texts are absolutely seminal for getting an understanding of where Imam Ahmad al-Rida Khan and other ulama stood with regards to some of the things that were going on. We cannot deny that Rashid Gangohi, Qasim al-Nutwi went and sat and studied with Salafis. We cannot deny that. And they came back with that theology. We simply can't ignore that. Now, Imdadullah Muhajir Makki was from amongst the Jama'ah of Deoband. That was fine. There was no dispute about that. Deoband is not solely one structure, but tends to be a fish. There's a fissure in the middle of them that divides them. There will be some of the Deoband in which they will have these Sunni tendencies. And these are usually those Deoband that have actually gone outside of the box and studied in other institutions outside of Deoband. And it centers them as being upon the Hanafi fiqh more strongly because they've gone outside of the box. And you find their theology lining up almost exactly with that of Imam Ahmad al-Rida Khan, i.e. Ahlul Sunnah. If you think that's something that's impossible, go look on Dar al-Iftah. Imam Mufti Muhammad ibn Adam, his fatwa are almost straight across the board. There are a few fatwa of Imam Shaykh Riyad al-Haq that are going to differ with that of Imam Ahmad al-Rida Khan's situation. You'll only find issues to do, say, with Mawlid, or the touching of the thumbs to the eye and adhan, and these are things that have to do with furu'iyat, and these type of issues. But on the theological aspects, their theology is the same. Now you'll find some in which there is an actual Salafi aspect to them, and they've taken on the Salafi theology in a fuller issue. And these are the people that form Dar al-Nadwa, or Nadwatul Ulama, Abul Hasan al-Nadwi. This is why you'll find people with this last name, Nadwi, because they're coming from Nadwatul Ulama, or Dar al-Nadwa. And I advise people, as I have before, to stay away from anyone that bears this, because they're a disease, and so is their theology. So, without Imam Nuh Amin Keller having studied the issue in depth, I think it's left him lopsided. But I would say that some of the reason why this has happened is because if someone around you prefers a particular color, they are not going to give you literature that contains disputing arguments regarding that color. The amount of questions that he has to deal with and contend with, sometimes it is a case that he feels that he has to answer them straight away. And it's always best for any teacher, even if he knows the answer, but if there's a gray spot or a blind spot, to deliberate and say, I'll come back to you. So you give a more well-rounded answer. I state then at the end of this then, his position on the Deoband Jama'ah Ahlul Sunnah issue is not complete because he does not have all of the literature in front of him. He hasn't read all of the literature. Someone cannot properly understand this issue without having studied Salafiyah and the disputes between them and Muslim Orthodoxy in depth. When someone does that and then they properly read into the Deoband Brahmi issue, they understand it far better, and it makes far more sense. Otherwise, it just seems like, well, they're from two different villages in India. What's the problem? They're both Asians. What's the situation? No, it's deeper than that. And some of the books that have come out that have tried to deal with it, like for example, Al-Mufannid al-Muhannid by Mufti Muhammad Adam, it's a good book, but Khalid Sarampuri, that book does not cover any of the fundamental issues that Jama'ah Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah, that it doesn't cover any of the issues that they have with the Jama'at Deoband. It doesn't cover any of those issues. What do you say about following the madhabs? Imam Ahmad al-Khan never questioned whether the people that he was going against should follow the madhabs. What do you say about Ash'ari's Maturid? That was not a situation in discussion. So it totally sidestepped that issue and didn't deal with the core fundamental issues that had to be sorted out. So I think what's happened with Imam Nuh Amin Keller is because he did not have all the literature, he's come to a decision, a very quick decision. And I think ultimately it's hurt him because a lot of the people that were really staunchly for him have turned against him. And the same thing happened with Imam Hamza Yusuf and some of the positions that he took. That a lot of people have turned against him. And these were people that were some of the stalwarts of Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah in the English language. But people turned against them because they said, you can't do that. And rightly or wrongly, if they don't deliberate enough, and I think ultimately it's hurt him because a lot of the people that were really staunchly for him have turned against him. And the same thing happened with Imam Hamza Yusuf and some of the positions that he took. That a lot of people have turned against him. And these were people that were some of the stalwarts of Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah in the English language. But people turned against them because they said, you can't do that. And rightly or wrongly, if they don't deliberate enough, it leaves the layman or the common man on the street forced to make a snap decision as well. If they make a snap decision, the layman has to be forced to make a snap decision. And I know brothers that in a snap decision have thrown their tapes away or thrown their lectures away because they had to make a decision. I can't let my kids grow up and then find out about this, that they believe this. And then I have to backtrack and explain, I'm not going to do that. So they've thrown them out. So it would have been better for him to look into the issue more carefully, but I realize the stresses of being asked numerous questions and being inundated. But I hope sincerely that he looks over the issue in depth, and then he'll come to a more well-rounded response.
Yeah, I think in answer to you, the comment that you made there, that Hamza Yusuf particularly has mentioned that there's no issue in reading publications from these groups, and he mentioned some of them in his speeches. The difficulty is that they do affect you, and what happens is if you say there's no point, actually you can read those publications. Yeah. And that's why when you mentioned the Maturidis of the Hanfis in Turkey, I to some degree
you understand.
And a lot of the Hanfi from the South Asian
they have that same shiddah.
Yeah, because the thing is, in order to diffuse this confusion or to get rid of it, it's perhaps better to keep away from their books and their scholars. Yeah. And that's the issue I think we've got now with the likes of Hamza Yusuf and Muhammad Khaled, is that they're so well known, and they're suddenly starting to bring these other things into which could cause mass confusion. Yeah. I mean that's the so the only thing I can really advise is when someone looks at the issue, to get to the bottom of any issue, you've got to read into the documentation that's present from both sides, and you have to understand the historic basis. Imam Ahmad al-Khan wasn't born in a vacuum. He's one of the greatest Afghani scholars that ever lived. His dad was a qadi in Afghanistan. He was not born in a vacuum. And those people that are coming from the Deoband Darul Uloom, they weren't born in a vacuum either. Where did they come from? And why is there an issue that there seems to be such a categoric difference between the ulama when you're looking at Imdadullah Muhajir Makki and Imam Ahmad al-Khan, they're almost like identical twins. But when you look at Rashid Gangohi and Qasim Nutwi, they're not. What happened in the link between the linkage, what happened? Well, there was a break. Break in what? Fiqh? There was no break in fiqh. They're all claiming they're Hanafis. They're claiming they're Maturidis. So then what happened? Because they digested some of the theology. And when they wrote the books and they translated those books into Urdu from the Arabic, and they translated those books and they spread like a fire, then all of a sudden, that's where the problems came in at. And that's why it's here. Yes? Yes?
You mentioned earlier on about Christopher Columbus.
Yes.
I can remember speaking to your brother about 6-7 months ago. And obviously you saying that the world was flat and they were worried about falling off the edge and stuff like that. And apparently, they didn't. And he came across a Quran ayat which says that the world is round, and he became Muslim after that. Is that true?
Christopher Columbus?
Yes.
Okay, the question is regarding a statement that Christopher Columbus sailing around the world when being concerned that he might fall off because of his flatness, and that he found an ayah in the Quran that the earth was round, and this caused him to become Muslim later Alhamdulillah, I've never ran across this before. From the best of my knowledge, I know that he died a Genoese Jew, a Genoese Orthodox Jew, and was buried with all the Jewish ritual procedures. He lived as a Jew, died as a Jew, and that's what I know about him. I can't say anything more of that. I've never run across that. If that's been stated, I'd like to know about that so I could research it and try to get further knowledge on it, but I've never ran across that myself. Yes? Is there a final question? No? Yes.
There was a documentary recently that was shown on my channel, and in it, well, I don't know if it was a documentary. Yeah, I think it was. And obviously the people, the group who were behind it, they were suggesting, or it might have been a dispatcher program. I'm not quite sure whether it was one of the two, or whether they got mixed up. But the thing was, what they were saying is Sheikh Riyadul Haq was given a tafsir on Surah Al-Fatiha, and obviously he's given a tafsir on Ghayrul Maghdubi Alayhim wa Ladhdallin on that, and he was obviously referring to the Jews and the Christians, and obviously the reporter took this out and, obviously saying that this is...
Blew it up. Yeah,
blew it up, saying that this is trying to create friction and animosity towards the Jews, and obviously anti-Semitism. Well, that's what they were trying to imply, although they didn't use those words. So the difficulty is here is that obviously a lot of the tafsir they refer to that particular ayah with that unless there's another one that you can pick up.
Question is regarding a statement or a dispatches program in which Sheikh Riyadul Haq was purportedly making tafsir on the Quran, and in quoting the last ayah of Surah Al-Fatiha, stated that this was referring to the Jews and Christians. I can confirm that Sheikh Riyadul Haq is correct in that commentary. One can find no better commentary on this than the Prophet ﷺ and the Sahih of Imam Bukhari under the chapter of commentary under Surah Al-Fatiha, in which he himself said that. We're going to have to ban the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ because he said it. That's true that there are certain things that were mentioned in the revealed law that go against the society that we live in. That's fine, because revealed law is never meant to run right alongside of society. It always exists outside of society. Prophets exist outside of society. The true mujtahid exists outside of society. So it's never going to be a situation where we'll always run counter to, unless they have control of that society, and then they subjugate it, obviously. So what do we do in this circumstance? We still keep telling the truth, but what we do is we tell them it's nothing against you racially, but your beliefs are false. So the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, who was poisoned by a Jewish woman, only days later ate lunch at the house of a Jewish tailor, but still insists their religion is false. Precisely. I've got no problem with you. If you want me to eat matzo ball soup with you and to have bagels and lox and other things, I have no problem with that. But if you die tonight and you bust your head open on the stairs, you're lost for all eternity, and the wrath of Allah will abide upon you and the fire for all eternity. There's no mistaking that. But I will eat dinner with you. And that's what we have to make the differentiation. So if we see the Jewish woman that's walking in Golders Green with the stroller, and we see her having problems getting the stroller up the steps, what do? We grab one side and we help her bring it up the steps. Because our problem with her Judaism has nothing to do with her as a person. So when I was in the bus, and I was at Stamford Hill in London, and the Jewish woman gets on, she's got 6 kids, her prayer book with her, her siddur with her, and I got up so they could sit down. In which a Muslim brother, and the rest of the unbelievers, a Muslim brother brought me to task for this. And also took me to task for eating bagels. In which my response to this individual was to say 2 things. Number one, where have we been told that their religion being false gives us the carte blanche to be wickedly deceptive and rude to them? Even the woman that put poison in the Prophet ﷺ's food, he had that woman brought and asked her why she did it, so that way the people could know around them. He didn't have her killed. She became Muslim. Secondly, the food, you mustn't eat from these people because, the food from the bagels and these things are going to drop bombs on them. Those people are Moroccan Jews I was eating from. There's no food of theirs going to Israel. A lot of the Moroccan Jews are anti-Israel. But a lot of it was we mixed between the man wearing the blue helmet running at you with an IMI Uzi or a rifle. He is different to the man that's in Stanford Hill with the black hat and the side curls. The man that's running at you with the IMI, yes, deal with him. You have to defend yourself. But the man that's walking in Stanford Hill, oh no, I'm not going to ask directions from him. He's a Jew. Well, on Stanford Hill, you're not going to be able to ask any directions from anyone because they're all Jewish up there. So if you're lost, as I was numerous times up there, how do you think you're going to find your way back to where you were? And then when you stop them and find out, green juice didn't come out or anything, and he says, yes, where you need to be is this. And I thanked him, and he said, no, thank you, and he left. That's it. We have to make the difference between Judaism as a false, reprobate, Messiah-denying, cultish, idolatrous, false religion, and between individuals within the Jewish religion who may be moral people and might be nice people. That's no problem. You're still going to go to the fire for all eternity if you screw around and die like that. But you know what? You're a nice guy. Play football with you. I'm going to try to win. And use that as leverage to try to present the faith to you if I do. And inshallah, hopefully, that will be something that will be a catalyst. Yeah?
What's the reference for that hadith of the poisoned woman?
The poisoned woman, that is mentioned in volume 4 of the Seerah of Ibn Hisham, if memory serves me correct. Volume 4, under the siege of Khaybar. Yes? So if there is no final question, inshallah, we'll convene from here. And next week we'll begin further on our next century. أقول قولي هذا أستغفر الله لي ولكم أستغفر الله إن الله غفور رحيم يرحمني الراحمين ولا إله إلا الله. السلام عليكم.